Alright guys, welcome back. I'm currently headed over to the shop. I last left you guys off with collecting the 2F Polo Coupe. My Mark 1.5 Derby was a Polo. And although I did do a full suspension conversion on that car, I didn't write down everything I did. So I'm obviously trying to look back in photos, try to figure out what parts I used, what parts I didn't use. On the Derby, I basically converted it from a single knuckle strut body setup to a two-piece setup like the Mark 1s, Mark 2s, Mark 3s have, where it's a separate knuckle and hub and strut body. Those two bolt together. The Polos are much like the Audi 4000s and like the B1, B2, Quantum Passats and the Foxes that we got here in North America. The Fox was a South American built Volkswagen that wasn't available in Europe, but it shared Audi style suspension. It was a longitude mounted front wheel drive car with the steering rack on the firewall, that the strut body and knuckle were one piece and all that. So my Fox shared more components with the early Mark IIs, Golfs and Jettas. So I didn't have to make axles in the Fox because the outer CV joint spline and size on the Fox axles were the same spline count and same size as the early Mark II hubs. So the Fox axles slid right through the Mark II hubs. On the Derby, that wasn't the case with Mark I or Mark II. So basically the outer Polo CV joint was a much smaller diameter and spline count than the Mark 1s. So I ultimately had to cut and pin and dowel, basically sleeve and balance axles to mate the inner CV joint of the differential of the Polo out to a Mark 1, a larger diameter, larger spline count Mark 1 axle. So on the 2F Polos, it seems like it's the same suspension as the pre-facelift Polo, which was real similar to the Mark 1.5 Polos. The Mark 1.5 Polos were just basically like a facelift. So I'm headed to the shop now to take some measurements. I was on the phone with the boys at Bag Riders today trying to get a plan sorted out for the car. So the impasse I'm at right now is whether or not to go static and build custom coilovers for the car or to bag it. And I think most of you will agree with me when I say that little hot hatches need to be on coilovers. I do like seeing Mark 1s and Mark 2s and, you know, little hot hatchbacks on air, depending on the style of the build or the project or whatever, or the overall theme of the car. But being a future giveaway car, this, you know, I'm gonna give this 2F hatch away. I'm thinking that being on air will be a better canvas for someone else, where, you know, maybe they live in an area where having a low static car is just too difficult. Having a car on air allows you to fit different wheels easier. It allows you to drive it to different places if you live on a dirt road. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. But I just got off the phone with my friend Zach at Bag Riders, and we were kind of talking about all the different options. Because there's no off-the-shelf parts available for suspension. There are in Europe. There's a few different companies. I think KW, TA, and there's one other that makes a bolt-in coilover for the Polos, which again are a strut body and knuckle one-piece deal. So manufacturing a coilover for that car is far more expensive because you have to include the hub as part of the coilover. Funny fact is the amount of time it took me to say all that on the drive over here is exactly how long it takes me to drive here from my house. So super blessed to have this space that close to my house. It's only like three or 4 miles maybe. So I'm gonna get the cue pulled outside, get the wheels off, and kind of show you a little bit about the suspension and my thoughts on what I may or may not do with it. Okay, so I just got the wheels off the Polo, but before I did, I kind of went around all the wheels once the car was up off the ground, gave them all a good wiggle, you know, kind of try to see if there's any loose or bad ball joints, tie rod ends, wheel bearings. You know, when the car's off the ground, you can get a good feeling for, you know, if any wheel bearings are really bad, you know, as far as play is concerned. Driver's side front had quite a bit of 12-6 play in it. And if you're looking from the back, the ball joint wasn't moving at all. It was the whole back of the axle and hub assembly. And so that usually says bad wheel bearing, right? Roasted wheel bearing. Race is gone, everything's just totally roasted in there. So I got the hubcap off, got the other wheels off, got this one off. I put the wheel back on just to show you the amount of play that was in it. I didn't feel like that was really too important to video. But what I found as to why it has the play was, so here we are. I put 2 lug bolts back in, tightened them up to show you the play. I immediately found the issue. And it's right there. So for anyone who doesn't know, there needs to be a 30mm nut, big old nut, on the outside of that axle, just like this one. Because that holds the whole hub assembly to the axle and to the car. Holds the whole assembly together. And this side isn't even on there. So, I know who imported the car, and they own a shop. And my friend Ross, who bought the car off of him, didn't even touch the car. He took delivery of it, put it in a storage unit, or in a storage building, and that was it. Didn't touch it. And it's really hard to believe that that didn't get picked up on. I mean, that's super dangerous. My dad owned a towing business for about 45 years. So we saw a lot of fatality accidents where a garage didn't tighten lug bolts on a wheel, and that wheel came off the customer's car, and that customer was killed because the car went off the road. So that's crazy. That's crazy. I mean, obviously the ball joint and control arm holding the hub on, I mean, that right there most likely wouldn't have allowed the wheel to come off the car. But it's kind of a dangerous thing to not have that nut on that axle. So, 2 things. I found the problem, and 2, it might not need wheel bearings. Even though I might be changing that all out anyway, because I might be doing a Mark 1 front end. But I thought that was kind of crazy. I kind of stood there staring at it for a minute, not believing that there wasn't a nut on the backside of that axle. All right, I got the pole up in the air, all the way up in the air, got the wheels off. Looks pretty good underneath. Looks far better than I was expecting, to be honest. You know, people forget that mainland Europe, and especially England, where a lot of these cars resided, get a lot of rain, they get snow, and they salt the roads. So cars over there really kind of succumb to the same illnesses and death that our cars here in the northeast of America do as well. So it's not uncommon to see a car from Germany or mainland Europe that's had floors done, or the rockers and doors are rotted out. And this one's actually really solid. There's been like one little floor patch on the passenger side floor right here, and that's it. Pinch welds are good. I mean, it's folded a little bit over here. You know, someone puts a jack under there and just starts jacking, you know. So, I mean, in the 30 years that this car's been around, I mean, that's to be expected, I suppose. But floors all the way back are pretty good. Driver's side is surprisingly good. Rockers are in great shape. All the way back. Great shape. Bottom of the doors are great. Passenger side, bottom of the doors got a little bit of rust here. but it's not bad. It's really not bad at all. I mean, the car is real solid. All the mounts look good. I mean, exhaust is a little worse for wear. I mean, everything's old. I mean, it was driven year round in environments similar to ours in the winter. So, you know, brake lines look pretty good. The rubber lines don't look too bad. Got an axle boot that's ripped on this side, but regardless of what I do with the suspension up front for coilovers or air, I'll take care of that, because it's either going to see custom axles with new CV joints, or if I stay Polo front end, I'll just do an axle. That's not a problem. And yeah, depending on how difficult it would be to get a passenger side axle, which is different than the driver's side, it's much longer. If it's difficult to get a full passenger side axle out of England or Europe, I'll just get a CV joint and just rebuild the end, because that's not that big of a deal. What is kind of crazy for this car is they introduced a catalytic converter on them. Now, most European cars don't have catalytic converters, and that's what we love about Euro cars, is they're a little bit more of a thoroughbred car. But this one, I remember reading online back a while ago that the facelifted 2F Polo, they introduced a catalytic converter. And it's an OBD1 car, so there's no check engine light, but there's really no reason for me to take that out. I am going to change the exhaust up, but probably from that resonator, or at least the beam out. I'll probably put like a little turbo muffler on it with a nice stainless tip that comes out the back to dress it up, make it look nicer, and give it a little bit of tone. I don't want it loud, I don't want it blatty, but having just a little bit of throaty tone to it with a nice chrome or stainless tip coming out the back will finish the back off nicely. So that's on the list. Yeah, like I said, underneath looks pretty good. There's a little bit of moisture. Transmission's got a little bit of weeping underneath. Oil pan is a little wet, but it's been in here for 2 days on the lift, and there's not a single spot on the floor. And yes, normally for a European car, that would mean there are no fluids in the motor or transmission if it's not leaving a puddle. But as you remember in the last episode, I checked the oil and it's quite a bit over full in this car. So it's a good sign that it's not leaking oil everywhere. It's very rare for a Volkswagen of this generation to not be leaking oil. All right, so let's talk suspension. I'll bring the car down a little bit and I'll discuss a little bit about the setup of suspension from the factory and a little bit of what I'm thinking of doing, which is similar to what I did on my Derby and my Volkswagen before that. Okay, so this is what I was talking about with the front suspension of the Polo. You'll see how the knuckle and the hub are welded right to the strut assembly, and up on the strut body is that tie rod plate that the tie rod end comes out to. So therein lies where the fabrication resides with building custom coilovers or a custom bag setup. When I converted my Derby to Mark I hubs in front suspension and my Fox to Mark II, that used Mark I and Mark II coilover bodies, which don't have a tie rod plate on them because the tie rods come out to the knuckle from the subframe on those cars. So on the Mark II coils in the Fox and the Mark I coils in the Derby, I had to actually fabricate and build that mount. Now, anyone who's been into this type of project knows that there's a thing called Ackerman angle. And when I did the Fox, I didn't think about any of that. That was about 12 years ago or so. And I basically just welded the tie rod plate onto the strut body at a 90-degree angle to how it mounts to the hub. And didn't realize that it's a little farther out than 90 degrees. And I had to shorten my tie rods because those arms came in so far that I couldn't adjust enough to get the wheels towed properly. So on the Derby, remembering what happened on the Fox, I kind of accounted for that. I moved the arms out a little bit so I didn't have to section my tie rods down, the tie rod tubes. So on this project, no matter if I keep the Polo front suspension and modify the strut tube for coilover or a bag, I have to keep that into account, because if I cut that off or mess with it at all, I need to make sure it goes back into the same spot, if not a very similar position, especially if I go to a Mark I front setup on it. What else is crazy is the sway bar in these cars double as a sway bar and a tension rod. The lower control arm is a single mount control arm. It's not an A arm, so it doesn't have two mounts which help hold caster forward and back. It's just a single mount lower control arm, which means it needs a tension rod or a strut rod in order to hold and adjust your caster and your forward and back movement of your hub. I'm not a tech, I'm just talking layman's terms here. But the sway bar here acts as that strut rod and that tension rod. So a lot of us with old European cars, when we lower them, the sway bar is the first thing you toss in the bin because half the time they resist the car from going lower. You end up working against the sway bar, and although you really want the sway bar in for handling and for comfortability when you're driving, a lot of times the sway bar will keep you from going as low as you want to. So in years past, I've taken the lower sway bars out in order to get the ride height that I want, in order to get as low as possible. In these cars, you can't do that. You'd have to rebuild the whole system. You'd have to take the sway bar out and ultimately build a mount off the bottom of this frame horn here and have some sort of like high misalignment joint with like an adjustable, tube in the middle with heim joints or something so you could adjust your caster. But it would have more range of motion than the sway bar in order to get you as low as possible. With this car, I don't think it's going to be a problem because in my Derby, I was able to put the oil pan with the exhaust that went under the oil pan on the ground with the coilovers with the Mark I front end swap that I did. With the sway bar / strut rod still in the car. So I don't think I'm gonna have to mess with that with how low I wanna go in this car. While I've got it here, I think I'll probably vacuum it out and just give it an interior cleaning and show you guys a little bit more of the interior of the car before I call it a night here. I got a lot going on in the laser shop. Still trying to catch up on jobs that stacked up while I was in Chattanooga, Tennessee for Riverside. So really need to spend the rest of the night working on that. But I'm gonna get it down, vacuum the car out, show you guys the interior, which is really cool. It's funny because a lot of my friends in Europe hate this interior. It's just a base model car. But to us, it's got a Euro-specific interior, and that's really cool. Interior has a quick wipe down. Nothing crazy. So at some point, I'll go through this whole interior and clean everything up properly and micro detail everything. But as I mentioned before, this is a Euro style interior. The seats match the door cards. And the door cards are like plastic. They're not like an upholstery cloth material. They're an actual like plastic, which makes them easier to clean. Euro specific 3-spoke wheel. I've always loved these wheels, so this is really cool to have in here. They did facelift this wheel as well. They went to like a larger 3-spoke where the middle part of the steering wheel came down a bunch more, but this is my favorite one, so it's actually kind of cool to have that one here. 160,000 kilometers, which is obviously less in mileage. And you can't really see from this angle, but no cracks in the dash. No cracks, which is great. It's got this weird like no door glove compartment with a little parcel shelf up top. Back when I first got into Volkswagens, my favorite thing about them were the dashboards and the different configurations throughout the different model platforms. Like the Corrado dashes were always my favorite because it made you feel like you were in some sort of cockpit. Like the center part of the dashboard almost like angled towards you, and it gave you a very like cockpit kind of a feel. So I like this interior a lot because this dashboard is Polo specific, and we never had a Volkswagen model here in the States that had this dash. Well, that's going to do it for this episode, guys. Just a quick one to kind of give you a little bit more of a look around of the 2F Polo. Still trying to figure out what I want to do with the suspension and how I'm going to go about it. Put in the comments what you think. Static or air? Coilovers, bags. Let me know what you think. I think I might bag it, but I haven't decided yet. It'd be fun to bag one. Just because the other two suspensions like this that I've built for the Fox and the Derby were both coilovers, so it'd be kind of cool for my own sake to do this type of suspension build again, but go air instead of coils. Well, let me know what you think. I always like seeing what you guys have to say or what you guys think. Also, Ludwig's Garage and Governors Club gear is live now. The link is in the description of this video. Thanks again to all you guys who have put some orders in today, this morning as I'm filming this. This morning is when it all went live. So huge thanks to everybody who's been putting orders in throughout the day today. But shirts, stickers, key rings, airlift 3P manifold plates, motel room key rings, stickers. I'm out of the hats. This is the Bag Riders hat, but I've still got a couple Ludwig's Garage 5-panel jockey caps and the vintage rope hats. I basically sold out of them at Riverside, so I'm gonna do another run of those and shirts. So stay tuned for more of those. But what's left in stock is on the web store right now, so go there and grab it while you can. So stay tuned for more videos on the Polo. Gonna start hammering here real soon once I get a game plan together. Gotta get a dry race board here in the shop and kind of lay everything out so I can see it every time I come in here. But that's it. Hope you guys are well. See you in the next episode.